Greetings everyone, my name is Dominic and today you're tuning in to the Comic Book Report, where we review comic books and graphic novels so you can get an idea of what to read. And today I am back with another list video. This one's catered a little bit to new readers, but hopefully anyone can enjoy. Today we're going to be talking about 5 comic books I wish I had read as a new reader. I can't wait to talk about these titles. These are all books I really love, but before we jump in, I do want to shout out the channel sponsor, OrganicPriceBooks.com. If you're looking to pick up your own comic book collected editions, please check out their website. You can actually find a link for it in this video's description, and if you see anything there you like, you can use my discount code at checkout, TheComicBookReport, to save $2 off of your order. Please note if you use my affiliate link or code to make a purchase, I will earn a small commission, but it's a fantastic way to support this channel. Thank you so much for considering. Now let's get started with today's list. First up, in no particular order, we have Superman, the Man of Steel, Volume 1 by John Byrne. This is a standard size hardcover edition, and it is Volume 1 of a 4-volume set that contains the entirety of this Byrne era for Superman. For people that maybe don't know, this is the first kind of post-Crisis on Infinite Earths Superman title, and it gives us kind of a fresh relaunch, kind of soft reboot for the character. In fact, it begins with a 6-issue miniseries, aptly titled The Man of Steel, and it basically reintroduces us to the character of Superman for, at the time, modern audiences. In those first few issues, we not only have the destruction of his homeworld of Krypton and his kind of exodus over to the Earth to be found by Jonathan and Martha Kent and to be raised to ultimately become Superman. But we also have some other great kind of character interactions and introductions, characters like Lois Lane and Lex Luthor, just to name a few. We even have Batman show up in these early issues. This is just an outstanding collection. Why I would have loved to read this as a new reader is because in my mind this is the quintessential kind of Superman run. In fact, I think it's one of the best Supermans, if not my favorite Superman run I've ever had the pleasure of reading. It is a little bit dated if you only read modern comics, and yet it is such a breath of fresh air if you're trying to read some of the golden or silver age Superman stuff. And that's not to say I don't have love in my heart for those eras, but I think that this is the first time they relaunched Superman in a way that felt more accessible to me as a reader. And I think why I would have loved to again find this as a new reader is because I started with some of those old golden age stories and the silver age stories from like the 30s or 40s, and then like the 60s for the silver age. And again, those stories are good, but there's a bit of camp, there's a bit of the narrative isn't quite what it was even by the time you get to the 70s or 80s over here with Byrne's era. And honestly, this would have been, I think, a better starting point for me for the Man of Steel. Not that I don't love going all the way back to his origins in Action Comics 1, but this would have been, I think, a better foundation for me to really delve into the character in a more substantial way. Byrne and Ordway and all these people attached to this book, they really understand the goodness of Superman, the kind of homespun Americana and moralistic values that this character just kind of inherently embodies. I really, really like their treatment of this character. I think there's a timeless quality to Byrne's work here as well, and I love that we get kind of the classic and just essential cast of characters within the Superman mythos kind of retold throughout the issues here. Like I said, this is a volume 1 of a 4-volume set, but this is a perfect place for new readers to start reading Superman, and honestly, I wish I got to it a little bit sooner. Next up is a Batman title. This is Batman Hush by Jeph Loeb and Jim Lee. This is actually my example for my favorite comic book art of all time. I am a huge Jim Lee comic book art fan. He's my favorite comic book artist, and I never thought his pencil work looked better than what we got here in Batman Hush. For those that maybe don't know, this is a kind of detective story. We have kind of a mystery throughout it where Batman's trying to find this elusive figure from the shadows known as Hush. Along the way, he encounters so many of his rogues rogues galleries of villains. We have appearances by so many of his allies, that kind of supporting cast of characters, and we have some kind of deepening of some of the important relationships in Batman's life. We have a little arc with Batman and Catwoman. Will say that here. But honestly, this is a great run of issues here. One of my favorite storylines. I know it maybe doesn't have as much narrative depth as something like The Long Halloween or Dark Victory, which was also written by Jeph Loeb, but I think it is a great modern Batman story that still has a huge thing to offer here. I just think it really packs a punch. I love the artwork. Like I said, I think the art even transcends the story in some ways, but this is just a beautiful book, and because I've loved it so much for many years, I kind of wish I read it as a newer reader. I did find it earlier in my comic reading journey, and yet there were still months or years that passed where I was reading other Batman works before I got to this, and I think if I read this sooner, it would have even supercharged my interest in Batman, honestly. I do think it's pretty accessible to new readers. It's a great way to get introduced to a lot of these mainstays within the Batman universe. Again, both his villains and kind of the Bat family and his allies again. But I just love it. The art is so immersive. The story, I don't know if it's timeless, but it's just a classic story at this point. I really think it's great. I know there's some people that maybe don't love it a lot, but I'm just a huge fan. 2 thumbs up for me. This is a book that I think I could have read this as one of my first Batman stories and been absolutely elated. And I think because this has my favorite art, of course I would have just liked to see it sooner. I would have loved to have this in my life at an earlier date. And I think for people that are just checking out comics, maybe you've read a couple Batman books, maybe you're interested in this character, if you haven't read Batman Hush, this is that little poke that just says, try to find a copy. You can sometimes find paperbacks for pretty cheap like this one. I encourage you to give it a shot. It is a very fun tale. Great, like I said, to find new characters, and honestly, I just think it's a really solid book. Please don't miss out on Batman Hush. And hey, while I have your attention, if you're enjoying this video and you've yet to subscribe to my channel, I would just like to invite you to do so. I'm always doing kind of top 5 or comic themed videos like this, along with comic book reviews, hauls, unboxings, things like that. Thanks for considering. Now let's keep this list going. This might be a surprising pick to some, but my next choice is the Venomnibus Volume 1 from Marvel Comics. This really collects the earliest solo series for Venom. We get a lot of little mini-series and crossovers here. This does not include his origins, where he's in the Amazing Spider-Man and things like that, or he's a villain. This really picks up around Lethal Protector, where he has his first kind of standalone mini-series where he becomes kind of more of an anti-hero. They gave Venom a lot more agency during this era, and honestly, this is really where it just kind of starts to kick into high gear for me. I picked up this omnibus a few months ago. I'm still making my way through it. I've definitely made a bit of a dent here, and already this is one I could recommend, and just wish I had found sooner. I am a child of the 90s, and that's where Venom was just running wild. I felt like the symbiote character, along with Carnage, were all over kind of Spider-Man franchise fandom at the time. It was in the Spider-Man animated series. It wouldn't be too long in the early 2000s where we'd get Spider-Man 3 with Venom, and I would see the toys, I would see trading cards, I would see so many things that just capitalized on Venom, but I had really not read his solo series up until really recently when I picked up this book. And honestly, these early mini-series and just seeing his turn from a bloodthirsty villain to kind of an anti-hero that's trying to do good things where he can, even if it's in a bit of a brutal manner. It's honestly really a welcome shift for this character for me. Not that I don't love seeing Venom as a villain, because I think that could be really powerful as well, but seeing him as an anti-hero and reading some of these early miniseries, it's just a lot of fun. Longer-term fans of this channel might know I'm a huge fan of the Venom run by Donny Cates and Ryan Stegman. That just blew me away at the beginning of this year, but I think if I had read this Venom's material earlier in my comic reading journey, I think I would have had a greater depth of appreciation for what this character could really do, and I feel like I only discovered that after reading Donny Cates. But then reading some of this material, I realized there's really aspects of this character that are kind of noble even from the beginning of his solo stuff, and I've really enjoyed finding that. I think this character is much more complex than he gets credit for, and I certainly understand why he has such a large fan base. And again, I think if I found this material material earlier, I think I could have been one of those people. I've always liked Venom, but I saw him more as a villain for a long time. But I really like reading him as an anti-hero. I am curious, has anyone read all of the Venomnibus Volume 1? I know there's also Volume 2 and Volume 3. Do we have any Venom fans out there? Would love Venom comics recommendations, maybe when there's some other hosts, like Flash Thompson during Rick Remender's tenure on the book, or we have things like when Matt Gargan is Venom. I haven't really read that as much. I think that's during the Dark Reign era. Anyway, if you're a Venom fan, sound off in the comments. Always looking for more good recommendations. Okay, next up we have the Uncanny X-Men Omnibus Volume 1 from Marvel Comics. This is a book I wish I found at the very beginning of my comic reading journey, and yet I only read this material proper, I don't know, last year, I think 2023, and honestly, this is a just quintessential comic book reading experience. This is by far one of the best runs I've ever read from Marvel Comics, and I am a huge Marvel fanboy. For those that maybe don't know, this is the era that really started the Chris Claremont run on X-Men, which spanned the better part of, 2 decades. And honestly, it all kicks off with that giant-sized X-Men issue, which actually wasn't written by Claremont, but after that issue, we jumped directly into Claremont's time on the book. Claremont is known for popularizing that team that consists of really big X-Men mainstays like Storm, Colossus, Nightcrawler, Wolverine. We have Cyclops still on the team, Jean Grey. And while he didn't create all of these characters, he really popularized this kind of second wave team. I think when a lot of people think of X-Men and, even the film franchise of X-Men, all of that has a basis with what Claremont brought to this franchise. Yes, there were earlier X-Men comics that introduced a lot of just main mythos and characters, but Claremont's really the one that took the reins and just hit X-Men into the stratosphere. The art on this book is absolutely incredible as well. I cannot say good enough things about it. But this run kicks off in the late 70s, and I would say once we hit the 80s and the 90s, we have X-Men in a whole nother level. In fact, I think they were one of the top selling comics during those decades, but it all really gets its start here at the beginning of the Claremont era. I know when I started reading comics, I read a lot of kind of early Silver Age books. I would maybe dabble with Bronze Age, but not much. And this was a run that I had friends that were really diving in, enjoying, loving reading. They would sometimes give me cliff notes of what happened during this Claremont run, but I never read it. I felt like the X-Men was too daunting. I felt like it was impossible to get into, and all I needed to know was you start right here. You start with giant-sized X-Men. You start then right after in that Chris Claremont era, and you just keep going. The way Claremont juggles multiple plot lines and character development, it's just unbelievably good. I do think he matures as a writer throughout the decades he writes X-Men, but his early stuff does still pack an absolute punch. This omnibus edition, I believe, is out of print at this time of the recording, but they always do reprints, give it a year or two. But I really love this book. You can find these issues in other formats as well, or digitally, but this is absolutely a great and new reader-friendly comic book run, and I just think it's one of the backbones of the entire Marvel Comics universe. Don't miss out on Chris Claremont's Uncanny X-Men. And rounding out our list today, we have the Spider-Man Omnibus by JMS Volume 1. Yes, this is the incredible run by J. Michael Straczynski over here at Marvel Comics. This is Volume 1 of a 2-volume set. I actually think Volume 2 is due for a reprint at the time of the recording in the next month or two. If you still need to pre-order that, hop on to organicpricebooks.com. Like I said, there's a link in the video description. Anyway, this is really what starts this great run. I know it's considered one of the most celebrated and best modern Spider-Man runs, period, full stop. And honestly, I couldn't agree more. I think that this is a brilliant Spider-Man run. There are maybe a story or two throughout JMS's run that are kind of notoriously controversial, but even those stories I think are well written, even if I disagree with the story direction. I'll leave it at that. Fuller details and reviews for these books as I get to them. But this run in general is just kind of a masterpiece. I think one of my favorite things about it is that JMS understands what makes this character work, and he really cuts to the core of Peter Parker. We get to see him as the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man as Peter Parker, as a civilian, as well as in his tights. I really, really love that we also explore the Parker luck, which is the best of times, the worst of times, at all times, and it just really works for me. Throughout the run as well, we have some really good and dramatic character conflicts, growth, interactions. We have some great fights with some of his mainstay villains, as well as adding in a handful of new villains to the mythos that are just really intriguing and interesting. I love what JMS does here. Like I said, I think he really captures the spirit and the soul of this character in a way that just feels so authentic and believable. The art throughout it is pretty amazing as well. I believe we have John Romita Jr. for part of the artwork here, and I don't think his art has ever looked better. I really, really like this omnibus. Like I said, it's part one of a 2-volume set, but this whole run is just incredible, and it really takes place during a really pivotal and just essential time in the history of Peter Parker. Why I wish I would have found this earlier as a new reader is because I think for a lot of people, Spider-Man is just a flagship Marvel character, arguably the most popular Marvel character of all time. And yet he's had a comic book history and continuity for the better part of a century, and it can sometimes be daunting knowing where to read, what are some of the best runs. And I think for me, when I think modern Spider-Man runs, this is probably my favorite I've had the chance to read. I think it has a definitive beginning, middle, and end, and yes, while not every story lands for me, it still overall really captures so many of the key ingredients of what I think makes Spider-Man as a franchise, as a character, well, amazing. To that end, do not miss out on Spider-Man by JMS. And with that, I think we're going to begin to draw this video to a close. Like I said, these are 5 comic books I wish I had read earlier as a new reader. I think for me, when you first get into comics, it's always best to gravitate towards what catches your eye, what characters or franchises sound interesting to you. Maybe you've seen some of the movies and you want to read some of the source material. I just think kind of go where your curiosity is and figure out what works for you. But I think if you're looking for recommendations, again, here are just 5 of mine. And these are 5 I wish as a reader I personally had found earlier. I think it would have helped better shape my comic reading experience and my enjoyment of some of these characters and franchises. But I know that I'm not alone. I think there's so many people in this community. If you're not a new reader, please comment. What are some of your favorite books that you think would be absolutely new reader friendly? I would love the comment section to look like a wall of recommendations that any prospective comic book reader can take a glance at and find just really great ways to get connected, get on-ramps into just some of these bigger franchises, or in some cases, maybe find independent comics they would have never heard about outside of your comments. Anyway, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. Maybe leave that comment, and until next time, this has been the Comic Book Report. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. Please don't forget to leave your like and maybe check out another video on your way out. Thanks, everyone. Bye.